Kia ora, welcome to episode 60 of the SWNZ Podcast, the podcast for New Zealand Star Wars fans. My name is Matt.
And my name is Christy.
Another interesting week for news from a galaxy far, far away, so let's jump in and talk Star Wars. Starting with our news roundup. First on our list of items to discuss, a quick mention about the Armageddon Expo. The next Armageddon Expo on the calendar was scheduled to take place in Turou on the 26th to 27th of February, with New Zealand moving into a red setting for the coronavirus situation that is unlikely to go ahead at this point. On that topic, Armageddon organisers have made a few comments, and it's important to note that they are not looking at cancelling any events this year. They will just postpone them as required. So they have said regarding Tauranga Armageddon Expo, they're in the process of putting plans in place if they have to postpone. They've said that they will do everything they can to host the event, even if they have to delay it a little. They won't cancel, they will postpone it if need be. I think that's just worth mentioning. I think it's pretty clear to most of us that we're not going to get down to the green setting that would be required for an event like Armageddon over the next month. So it's highly likely that the Armageddon Expo in Tauranga will not take place. The following Armageddon Expo is scheduled to take place in Christchurch on the 26th to the 27th of March, 2 months from now, so that is still plausible, but watch this space. Big casting news that has come through the internet via HollywoodReporter.com. Mary Elizabeth Winstead joins Rosario Dawson in the Ahsoka Disney Plus streaming series. Now, of course, we already know by way of social media comments that Rosario Dawson's made that Hayden Christensen is reprising his role of Anakin Skywalker for the series. We don't yet know what sort of role Mary Elizabeth Winstead might be playing, but she's most definitely an interesting addition to this lineup.
Yeah, I enjoyed her in Birds of Prey, where she played Huntress. So she's familiar with sort of franchise movies, and for people that may not be aware, she is currently in a relationship with Ewan McGregor. So it's not entirely surprising that she's made her way into the Star Wars universe. I'm very excited to see what capacity she might be involved in, what sort of characters, whether it'll be a minor role, a significant role. But either way, I'm very excited. I'm just hoping we get some more concrete news about the upcoming series from the official StarWars.com channels, but I'll take any kind of leaks and reports I can get for the meanwhile.
So Ahsoka hasn't started filming just yet, I believe, from memory. I think it's due to start filming in a little over a month, and as we've said many times, we'll expect information after that. It's interesting your comment about Mary Elizabeth Winstead's relationship with Ewan McGregor. She has, of course, worked with him on a couple of productions, Birds of Prey and prior to that, Saga. And so that does raise the question, is there any chance that she will end up being on screen with Ewan McGregor in this series? Of course, we have no suggestion that Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi will show up in Ahsoka. But having said that, Hayden Christensen we do know is returning to play Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, and he is also playing that same character in the Ahsoka series. It's not completely off the cards that Obi-Wan Kenobi may show up in some form or another, flashback or whatever, in the Ahsoka series. But just an interesting conversation about the potential overlaps and networking between all of those actors and the series that they'll be appearing in. Okay, our news roundup for this week is quite a lot of bits and pieces from different sources, which is kind of interesting. In the random category, Anthony Daniels, who has famously played C-3PO in most instances where that character has shown up in some form or another, both live action, animated, computer generated, video games, etc., has posted on Instagram that he is currently involved in a motion capture project. And the speculation is that this is possibly for a droid story, the series that's going to be showing up on Disney+. Now, just reminding everyone what we know about that title so far. The original announcement about a droid story stated that as Lucasfilm continues to develop new stories, the intersection of animation and visual effects offers new opportunities to explore. Lucasfilm Animation will be teaming up with Lucasfilm's visual effects team, ILM, to develop a special Star Wars adventure for Disney+, a droid story. This epic journey will introduce us to a new hero, guided by the legendary duo R2-D2 and C-3PO. So again, just a little bit of speculation there. Anthony Daniels definitely active, doing something Star Warsy presumably at this point, and it'd be nice if it turns out to be something like a droid story, something that's actually going to show up on Disney+. The possible alternatives, of course, are simply related to video games of some sort, but we don't know if a direct connection or a direct installment that actually fits with at this point. But we do, in fact, have some other very, very immediate and interesting Star Wars video game news. In the last couple of days, a formal announcement about the release date for the long-awaited LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga has come through. That will be released on April the 5th. This is a long-awaited game, as I say, that's been delayed a few times. It will be coming out on the Xbox One family of devices, Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch and PC, so pretty widely available and accessible. There is also a gameplay trailer that is associated with this announcement that came out via StarWars.com. Quite a long one, about 6 minutes from memory, and it shows a few interesting bits of information about this game. We know that there are 20 planets involved, 300 characters that you can actually build up into your repertoire. So one of the biggest the biggest LEGO Star Wars game to date.
Yeah, if you're fans of the original LEGO Star Wars, and basically if you've ever played those games, you'll probably have very fond memories of them. I found this really, really exciting. The gameplay trailer wasn't just lots and lots of people playing the game. It was actually going through explaining how you play the game, that it's broken up into the 3 trilogies, and then you sort of start at the first movie of that trilogy. It showed how you can navigate around the sort of galaxy with a galaxy map, visit all sorts of planets, that there are sort of space missions that you can do as you travel between that. It's got some new sort of force abilities. You can now sort of target with blasters, which was something that was sort of always missing from some of the other ones. It was always a little bit haphazard when you're trying to target very specific things. And some really neat, the graphics, the gameplay, it all looked really interesting. New force powers and stuff like that. Some new tricks, like they had like a scavenger grapple gun, so you can like climb up walls, and the ability for droids to kind of get through small spaces and stuff like that. And a fun teaser for fans of the really, really original LEGO Star Wars game is that there is a mumble mode, which if you've ever played the really, really original ones, you would remember that the LEGO characters don't speak in any of the cutscenes. They kind of just sort of mumble, and you can kind of get the gist of what's going on because you know the Star Wars stories. So if you're a fan of that original thing, you can switch that on and play the game with that sort of mumble mode on, which I saw a lot of sort of fan reactions to when this trailer came out. So I'm very, very excited. We've finally got a date. The trailer looks awesome. I can't wait to dive in and start playing this one.
Yeah, so some very fun visuals. Even the sort of menu systems look quite fun. The large vehicles look fantastic, rendered like this. And as you say, it seems a lot more complicated than previous versions in terms of gameplay.
But still playable and still like an appealing to a range of ages. And one thing that I thought was fun, they obviously know the sort of fondness, the way that fans love certain things. When they're talking about being able to play your favorite characters, there is a segment of the Gonk Droid, and anyone who's sort of like, seen the memes and stuff like that, like the Gonk Droid is their favorite LEGO Star Wars character. I think that that's fun that they included that little snippet there just to kind of reference that sort of fan moment there. But there's lots of great characters, and it's just really fun to see all the bits and pieces. We had shots from Naboo, we had shots from the sort of opening scenes of Poe Dameron in The Force Awakens, and we had Hoth scenes and all sorts of goodness, so it's really exciting.
Okay, so that's not too far off now. Finally, now we have a specific date to target, and yeah, like I say, you better play that on just about any device, so that's going to be really available to a lot of people. Other Star Wars video game news just out this morning is a formal press release on StarWars.com describing that Electronic Arts and Lucasfilm Games have announced new Star Wars titles in development, and the developer is Respawn Entertainment. So there's 3 games in particular that they're working on that will be coming out over the next little while. We don't have solid information about the timelines, but it is interesting to know what is in development, what is in the pipeline. Those titles are the next installment in the Star Wars Jedi franchise, so the sequel to Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, a strategy game, and a first-person shooter. They'll all be coming via the developer Respawn Entertainment. This is a little bit interesting because Electronic Arts previously worked with developers DICE to make the new generation Battlefront 2, but this notion that Electronic Arts is passing all their games over to the developer Respawn Entertainment rather than DICE pretty much draws a line under the vague hope that we might get more Battlefront games, I think.
I honestly don't really mind if they just sort of reboot sort of Battlefront. It doesn't need to be called Battlefront to be essentially the same thing. As Star Wars gamers would know, they kind of bungled the last Battlefront, the way it came out, the sort of fan reaction.
They bungled historically, but it's in a bungled state now as we speak.
It's in an almost unplayable state. You know, they said that they weren't going to support it, and that's fine. Okay, you're not going to add new characters or new maps. That's fine. Let players play it. But it has been plagued for weeks by a bug where people get down to about 1 health point and then never die. So you've just got all these players running around shooting at each other and nobody dies. So
I believe that actually happened
frustrating.
prior to the Christmas break.
Yeah,
and
so it's been weeks.
People thought that there would be a delay because developers took time off, the studio took time off over Christmas, but we're well past that and it's still in that state. It's even had a patch, but the patch didn't fix it.
It seems like such a shame. You think that the likes of Lucasfilm and Disney and Electronic Arts would want their products to be thought of as good products by the consumer. And then when we look at Jedi Fallen Order, when it came out, people loved it. People loved playing it. They want more. They enjoyed the characters. And so it kind of makes sense that you look at the way that these two modern games came out, the fan reaction, how highly they are sort of ranked on review sites and things like that. It doesn't take a lot of thinking to go, okay, maybe let's go with this successful company to make more Star Wars games. And I'm excited. It doesn't need to be called Battlefront for it to be just a fun shoot 'em up, Rebels versus Empire, or, whatever faction versus other faction game, for it to be fun. And I'd kind of like to see a little bit of a new take on it. We keep seeing the same thing churned out. And yeah, it gives you a bit of nostalgia, but they also kind of try and overcomplicate it by adding in new stuff to kind of make it seem new. I just like the classic versions where it was like, okay, load in with whatever character you want, off you go, shoot the other players. It was easy. Any Star Wars fan could jump in without too much gaming experience and just have fun. They had the against AI, where it was the computer generated. So if you didn't want to play against other people, you just wanted to have fun playing the game, you could do that. And they didn't really give fans that option much in the new Battlefront. They were like, nope, people only want to play shooters against other people. And I'm like, well, yeah, some people do, but not everyone. Yeah. I played an awful amount of the classic Battlefront 1 and 2 just against the AI, just against the computer. And I had a lot of fun there. It was like good practice. But yeah, I'm excited. Yeah. I kind of wish that they had a little bit more information when they kind of give us these teasers, because if they don't even have too much, like a name or a poster or something like that, it's going to be years away.
I remember the teaser information, the early information we got from Battlefront was just about the graphics development.
Yeah.
There was, the DICE studios, they just were showing the level of detail they were going to replicate Stormtrooper weapons, Stormtrooper helmets and so forth very early on, even before we started to see anything related to gameplay. But anyway, so probably a line drawn under Battlefront 3, as I said. But Jedi Fallen Order, very well received. It was developed by Respawn Entertainment, and that is the group that's going to be carrying that series forward and developing these new games. But on the topic of Jedi Fallen Order?
Yeah, exciting news on there. Like, not exactly relating, but one of the popular characters from that game has just been announced as being introduced into the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes app game. So the second sister will be released in the coming week. She is a Inquisitor from the game. She was featured heavily in kind of the advertising. She got her own action figure, a Funko Pop, so it's not too much of a spoiler. Her design is out there, and she's being added into Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, which is exciting news for fans of the app game, because it opens up. The developers have basically said that we're going to get a full team of Inquisitors. Which means that we could get some Inquisitors from Rebels, ones from the video games, maybe some from sort of other aspects of there, because there are quite a wide range now. People have pointed out that the Grand Inquisitor from Rebels isn't a character that's available in the game yet, so we're really hoping that this will bring in some really interesting characters. But again, it's really fun to see characters from other video games being added into Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, because of course Second Sister is following hot on the heels from the addition of Iden Versio from Battlefront 2. So it's fun to see some of these popular characters being pulled from other Star Wars video games and being added into the app games. So it's a way of sort of tying it in. They know that generally if you're playing app games, you've probably played or regularly play some of the other Star Wars games. So I'm very, very excited. Her kit looks really interesting. I think she's going to be one of those characters that really does well when she's got her full team of Inquisitors there, but she also works very well with the Empire. People have noted that the Inquisitorius tag means that we might get other characters like the Purge Trooper from Jedi Fallen Order to sort of work in tandem. So very exciting there.
So Galaxy of Heroes is developed by Capital Games, isn't it? But it's published by EA. So EA does seem to be pulling in characters and material from their other games, because they've done that for Old Republic into Galaxy of Heroes as well. So interesting. Be interesting if they pull in more than just the second sister.
Yeah. Well, since the addition of Starkiller and the likes of Dash Rendar and Mara Jade in that recent sort of legacy event, people are really, really wanting Cal Kestis to be added to the game. And we're not sure if that's like on the horizon, whether they're going to pull in a few other ones, but it is really fun to see some of these popular Star Wars characters from across all sorts of comics and video games being added to the game. It's becoming a really, really in-depth game to play. There's such a huge variety of characters. And of course, they always add in the new characters from the TV shows and things like that. So it's really fun to see characters from The Mandalorian. You know, you can get the Razor Crest in there. It's a really cool game, and I play it daily, and it's really exciting to see just how much ongoing effort the developers are putting in some really cool characters and game modes for fans to play.
Okay, we've got a handful of product announcements and local store reports to talk about before we move on to a in-depth discussion about episode 4 of the Book of Boba Fett. First up, in terms of product announcements, just over the last couple of days we've learned that there's a new vintage collection Boba Fett figure coming out based on his appearance on the planet Morak in the last season of The Mandalorian. So this is a slight difference, a slight variation from his initial appearance in the Book of Boba Fett. But as I've said before, we're super keen to collect all the versions of Boba Fett from his initial appearance on Tython with black robes all the way through his different versions of his armor and any subsequent variations we get. We're really keen to get these in both 3.75 and 6-inch Black Series scales. Now, this new 3.75-inch vintage collection Boba Fett figure is a Target exclusive in the US. We don't know if it's going to be carried in New Zealand, but these days we're seeing more and more instances where those US exclusives are showing up in New Zealand, and it's just a matter of waiting to see how that will pan out, and we'll report on that when we get that information. The next Star Wars replica weapon from Nerf is Boba Fett's E3 blaster. It was announced a couple of weeks back, but it is showing up at many New Zealand retailers priced at $229. This is quite a decent replica. It's of course not quite prop level or necessarily 501st Legion costuming level, but it looks quite good in terms of proportion. It's at least 90% of the appropriate scale, the appropriate size and length. And it can be repainted if you're into that sort of thing. There's a nice display piece for it to put on your wall or on a shelf, or you can use it straight up as a Nerf gun if you are a Nerf fan. That is available at Mighty 8 for $229. Pre-order up now.
It's a little bit interesting that they're continuing on with this range. I know
it's deluxe level of guns, deluxe weapons. Yeah.
The Amban Rifle from The Mandalorian is still widely available. It was kind of advertised like it was going to be very limited, like you had to pre-order it because these things weren't going to be sitting around at bulk amounts. But it's pretty hard to walk into an EB Games and not see at least a couple of these sitting there.
Has it, I think.
And the Amban Rifle is quite long, and it's actually cheaper than this Boba Fett rifle. So it's interesting to see that they're going in with a slightly higher price point, considering that the other rifle is still available, but it must have sold reasonably well. They know Boba Fett is a very popular character. And that even if you're not the sort of person that really wants your exact screen accuracy, that these blasters are, I remember back in the old era of the old sort of Hasbro electric blasters, and a lot of people would just, spray paint them black, you put it on your wall, and it's a pretty good replica. Unless you go and put it right next to a screen accurate level prop, you're not really going to notice the differences.
They're certainly better than a lot of the Nerf guns that have come out, Star Wars Nerf guns that have come out in the last few years.
But I don't think Hasbro in the older era ever did this one in an electronic or foam dart version. I don't recall it ever being made.
No.
If it did, it would have been exceedingly hard to get a hold of. The Stormtrooper and the Clone Troopers and the Battle Droid blasters tended to be the three that you saw the most in the older eras, and from time to time Han Solo's blaster. Ones that were easy to mass produce and very recognizable. Boba Fett's is a one character weapon. It's a bit bigger. I don't know how it would be like to fire. Probably easier than the Amban Rifle. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what fans think of this when they get it in hand.
I think they're kind of cool. As they come off the shelf, I think they're definitely a toy with the bright white and orange colouring. You do need to paint them up if you want to make a decent prop display out of them. I think the reason the Amban Rifle just ended up being a little bit of a peg warmer at a couple of stores is that phenomenon where different independent stores think it's going to be a real hot seller, and the overall consequence is we end up with more in the country than there is strictly demand for, and it's not the fault of any one retailer. It's just the fact that there's multiple retailers, presuming that they're going to be the ones that are going to get it in store and sell it, but other people are doing exactly the same thing. So overall there's an abundance, and consequently there's even been price drops on that Amban. I think Mighty Ape has had it and may even still have it at a discounted level.
Yeah, I think Boba Fett's rifle being shorter than the Amban Rifle might mean that kids would enjoy it a little bit better. The long scale of the Amban Rifle makes it a little bit unwieldy for kids that want to run around and fire Nerf darts at each other. This one's probably a little bit more practical, although be it a bit expensive. But goodness, some of those Nerf guns do get up to some pretty big sizes. So I'm sure there are, 10-year-olds running around with some pretty hefty Nerf guns. So this is probably quite small compared to some of them out there. But yeah, a little bit on the pricier range because it's a replica. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they continue the line after this one. Okay,
from Kmart, there is a 6-pack of cheapish, about 6-inch scale action figures. This 6-pack includes 5 point of articulation figures of the Mandalorian, Din Djarin, Grogu with a hoverpram, Death Trooper, Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Rey. It's priced at $39. This is a slightly different product from Black Series, but fits in similar scale. I haven't seen them side by side. I don't know if anyone's actually made a comparison side by side. But it's great for kids for just sort of getting a basic core of interesting characters. Most of the figures have pretty rudimentary articulation, as they have their weapons basically cast into their hands on the whole. But it's a great price. It comes with a version of Grogu's hoverpram. Now, it's been on the shelf at Kmart for quite a while now, but it hasn't been available online. So the reason we're mentioning it here and now is just over the last little while, the last week or so, that item has become available online. It's been visible, but showing up as returning soon.
Especially since not every town has a Kmart. Yeah, exactly. So it's been great to see it finally being added online. Because I think $39 is a great price point for 6 figures. You're not buying Black Series. Well, most people are probably not buying Black Series for their children to play with. They're a great scale for kids, but the price point just puts them all out. And this is 6 figures for less than the price of a standard on-shelf Black Series figure, being around that $40 price point. So this is great. And a fun mix of characters. You've got some original trilogy, some sort of, sequel era, and of course the new guys, Mando and Grogu. So there's kind of like a fun mix of characters there for kids to just have imaginary battles in the backyard with.
Now, and in a completely different category, Seagate. We mentioned a few podcasts back that Seagate would be producing some Star Wars licensed hard drives, external hard drives. And it looks like those are finally available for pre-order in New Zealand, or at least one iteration of them is the 2TB Whaakuda portable game hard drive, which looks like a block of Beskar from The Mandalorian, is available to order at JB Hi-Fi, and that will be shipping later this month from the 28th of February. $149 for the 2TB version of this interesting product, and it may well show up from other retailers. I believe it's available from EB Games in Australia, but it hasn't shown up on the New Zealand EB Games website. But it and possibly other sizes of the external hard drive will be available, possibly from other retailers locally as well.
It's one of those fun products that maybe wasn't on your radar, but kind of makes a lot of sense. Beskar has a certain value within the Star Wars universe, so it kind of makes sense that, you store your sort of valuable files and things like that on it. It's obviously not the biggest hard drive out there in the world of sort of modern storage capacities, but 2 terabytes is a fun. Otherwise, because you've got a sort of a little bit of a tack on of the sort of limited nature and the licensing fees. So this is going to cost more than a standard 2 terabyte drive.
Not too bad,
but
really.
It's fun. It's got some lights on it. It's got the cool Beskar sort of silver swirl on the surface. It's got the sort of Mandalorian text, which I believe says this is the way on the back. I've got to double check that. But it's really quite fun. And just one of those ways where it's an everyday item that is Star Wars. So you can kind of buy it and add a little bit of Star Wars to your everyday life. That's just fun, and I'm really glad to see our local stockist having it.
So first visibility is at JB Hi-Fi, but maybe I'll show up at others. We'll keep an eye on EB Games and report if they get it in stock as well. Alrighty, episode 4 of the Book of Boba Fett, entitled The Gathering Storm. This is the midpoint in the series. Prior to its screening, we'd seen 3 episodes. Subsequent to its screening, we've got another 3 episodes. So it was the episode that tied the loose ends together, and it seems to have been pretty well received online. It was directed by Kevin Tancharoen and written again by Jon Favreau, who's penned all of the episodes so far. Now, Kevin has not done other Star Wars material before, but he has done a lot of work with Marvel, particularly working on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Iron Fist, and Humans. But he's also worked on DC series such as Arrow, Legends of Tomorrow, and Titans. So he's had a lot of experience with that sort of universe of material. So it was kind of interesting that he's moved over and done this episode of Star Wars content. Right, this episode was split into an initial chapter of Boba Fett having flashbacks from his Bacta tank, and then a slightly shorter section in real time. The first section focuses on him trying to reclaim his ship, his fire spray gunship, the Slave One, from Jabba's palace. And initially he determines that it's protected by too many guards. He's off planning on his bantha, and he sees flares off in the distance, which we know, and it's partly given away by the music that plays at that instance, that actually represents the point in time where Din Djarin is chasing down Fennec Shand, not too far away from where Boba Fett happens to be camping. And so this is where we see the intersection of Boba Fett's story with Din Djarin's story, even though they don't immediately cross paths. But Boba Fett goes to investigate on his bantha, and he finds Fennec Shand dying from a gut wound, essentially. He takes her into the outskirts of Mos Eisley to a mod parlor where the youth of Tatooine get their cybernetic modifications, and by way of quite extensive modifications, she is saved. So in return, Fett requests Fennec Shand to help break into the palace, which at this point in time is ruled by Bib Fortuna. So they have to determine how many guards are there and come up with a plan. They get in through a sewer outlet grate, basically, and after quite a bit of fighting with guards internally, they do manage to retrieve the Slave One. And it's at that point that Fennec Shand says that she's inclined to stick around with Boba Fett for the ride. In terms of tying up loose ends, as he basically says, with the Slave One back in his hands, they basically kill off the biker gang that Fett believed massacred the Tusken tribe that he belonged to. And then they go to the Sarlacc pit to see if it's going to be possible to find his missing armor. Now, we know that the Jawas took the armor off Boba Fett. He was briefly conscious during that, but it is presumed that he was largely delirious from his encounter within the gut of the Sarlacc, so he's not actually sure what happened with it at this point. They end up killing the Sarlacc using a seismic charge. That whole sequence is pretty cool, and we'll probably discuss it in a little more detail shortly, but just to continue running through the synopsis. Boba Fett, of course, obviously does not find his armor inside the Sarlacc. Okay, Boba Fett emerges from the Bacta tank, and the droid that handles his armor basically informs him in a moment of brief exposition that he is now healed, that he doesn't need ongoing Bacta treatment, which may signal that we're not going to see flashbacks of this exact type from this point on. Boba Fett goes to the Sanctuary Cantina where he witnesses Chrysanthemum fighting with Trandoshans. And a quite interesting sort of exchange. He goes in there to try and find, I guess he was going to try and find Chrysanthemum, but he's basically just standing observing. Quite an interesting encounter, quite an interesting process. And we see Garsa Fwip have a conversation with Chrysanthemum at that point as well. He does in fact manage to recruit Chrysanthemum to his cause. And then we sort of switch scenes to see a banquet where Boba Fett and Fennec Shand are talking to the other crime lords of Mos Espa, trying to entice them to unite against the Pike Syndicate. They all do ultimately refuse, but with the help of a little bit of a jump scare from the Rancor beneath the Rancor pit grate, Boba Fett convinces them all to at least remain neutral, to not interfere and fight against him while he goes up against the Syndicate alone. It's at that point where Fennec Shan asks what their treasury, what their financial situation is, and says that there is a way to hire reinforcements for the imminent war. And the episode closes with a switch in the audio track to the Mandalorian theme, which kind of gives us a little bit of a clue or a little bit of a hope as to what we might see in the next episode.
Yeah, so the episode starts out with Boba Fett on his bantha, and I liked the moments with his bantha that we got in this. We saw the bantha's tail wagging, he feeds it, he talks to it, and I like those sort of moments. A lot of the episodes in both The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, we've seen banthas kind of being just sort of cows. They're in the background, they often get killed and sort of, collateral damage from firefights and things like that. But this was a moment we actually got a little cute moment there, because obviously the banthas are looked after and somewhat prized by Tuskens. It's their way of getting around the desert, sort of like camels in deserts and things like that.
Well, in the older EU Legends EU, they almost have a symbiotic relationship with them, and as they reach an age similar to the way they get their gaffy sticks, they actually do have their own bantha, and Boba Fett does seem to be interacting with this one as if it is his specific bantha.
Yeah, he calls it old girl at some point.
Couple of points, yeah.
Yeah, which I thought was really cute. It looked like it was puppeted. The movement of its mouth it sort of reminded me of the way Jabba moved his mouth in Return of the Jedi and things like that. So it felt like it was another instance of them trying to be sort of more present with practical effects. It was just a
little bit under-articulated for what they could have achieved with CG, which looked fine, but conveys that it was probably a physical prop. And we do know that there was one physical prop of the bantha that was puppeted.
Yeah.
And it looks like this version with an articulated mouth was in fact it for many scenes.
I thought it was interesting that they didn't specifically, when we see the flare and you get that little bit of music, I didn't actually quite catch it the first time, but as soon as I saw the flare, I'm like, oh, that's the scene from The Mandalorian, because we had just recently watched that in preparation for the Book of Boba Fett. We'd gone back and watched all the episodes that had either Fennec Shand and Boba Fett in them. So it was very present in my mind. So as soon as I saw the flare, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's going to happen.
The flare served a very distinct purpose back in the first season of The Mandalorian. It served the specific purpose of blinding Fennec's night vision sensors of her helmet, basically. So if they knew in advance that it would also secondarily serve as a way of signaling this crossover between the series, and that's really great forethought and fantastic writing.
Yeah, because we're not, you never really know how much sort of fleshed out some of these scenes are. They're like, oh yeah, because obviously at the end of the episode, with that mysterious figure walking up to her presumably dead body,
Fennec's body, yeah.
The audience knows that, oh yes, that's not the last of her. And, the noise that, like, it's crazy to think that they had this kind of plan written all the way back then. They're like, oh yeah, that's going to be Boba Fett and he's going to rescue her and stuff like that. So it was fun to finally see how this all played out. I wasn't actually sure if they would show it because we kind of can put the pieces together fairly well, but I did appreciate that they actually went through, because we know from The Mandalorian that she has sort of a cybernetic midsection. She pulls it back to reveal it and sort of says that she's sort of, indebted to Boba Fett because, he saved her, because, the Mandalorian was like, hey, I thought you were dead. So we see how that happens. He finds her there, puts her on his bantha, rides into town, and then we go see the mod parlor, which has, a sort of a montage of different people. We see different youths with sort of eyes and all sorts of gadgets and things like that on their body. It was sort of a fun montage. I think I read that somebody picked up that the one doing the modifications has it's a droid hand, and that some people reckon it looked like a B2 battle droid hand, the super battle droids. If that's, I haven't seen any sort of direct comparison. I think that would be interesting.
Big broad
to
fat
kind of,
fingers
yeah,
certainly conjured up.
It looked like they were like directly on the camera to try and be recognizable for a reason. So that would be kind of fun to see, because obviously this is well after the Clone Wars, but there would be like all sorts of lots of junk droids around the galaxy to sort of use. We assume that mod parlors use scavenged bits and pieces. Who knows? Maybe the Jawas sell them bits and pieces that they find wherever they get their bits and pieces from. And then we get a montage of the sort of the main modifier person at the mod parlor doing a montage of sort of putting the bits and pieces into Fennec's abdomen, and we kind of get like the little movements of little metal rods and stuff like that. It reminded me of the scene where we see Luke flexing his fingers, watching the little metal parts move in his wrist.
I think that was intentional because on the whole it's completely plausible from a sort of physiological and anatomical point of view, but that's Star Wars. That they have, without having to question or investigate it, they have cybernetic capabilities that don't really make a lot of sense, but they just do, and it just works.
Yeah, well, we're now living in a post-Darth Maul cyborg world, you know. He was fully cut in half. He doesn't really have a digestive system or anything like that. But we know he's still fully alive. He's walking around with cybernetic legs, being the leader of, you know, Crimson Dawn and everything like that. So we're like, we've like...
People coming back from the dead is a trope across many, many TV series, but it's particularly been said that as of Star Wars, death does not stick.
Yeah. Either with the Force or through technology. It's always fun to see how they sort of weave, particularly if a character is like really beloved, like Darth Maul, you know, everyone thought that he didn't get enough time in Phantom Menace, and then we've got Maul in a huge array of media after that moment and things like that. So that was fun. And so after she's fixed, he takes her back out sort of to the desert, because obviously he doesn't linger around town too much. And she wakes up. She discovers that she's got the cybernetics. She's not dead. Boba Fett sort of explains to her how he saved her, and he knows who she is. He knows that she's a master assassin, and that there's sort of between their conversations, she knows that there's a bounty on her head, because that was why she sort of got killed in the first place. Air quote, killed. Obviously she's not. And she knows who Boba Fett is, but when he says that he is Boba Fett, she's like, no, Boba Fett's dead. And he's like, no, I was left for dead. And we kind of get that dialogue that we saw in the trailer, that he was left for dead on the sands of Tatooine, like she was. He offers her black melon. We get a little bit more about that, talking about that it takes some time to get used to the black melon. After that, you start to crave it. I thought that was kind of fun, constantly sort of referencing this food source. And so he tells her about his time with the Tuskens, and that they were basically all killed by a swoop gang. So it's obviously that he wants... That he needs a little bit of help. He's got a plan. He wants his starship back.
So it's really hanging a lantern on the fact that he's in a different headspace than he has been historically, that this has been, his time with the Tuskens has been the turning point where he's sort of realised that he's been a pawn in other people's games for a while now, and others are benefiting more than he is from his actions. Especially
since, as a young boy, he saw Jango getting beheaded in front of him for, you know, not really sort of... not really doing a job. He was just kind of there because somebody else paid him to be there. There wasn't he didn't need to be there and stuff like that. So obviously both Fennec and Boba Fett have been essentially killed by other people. He's seen his one family member be killed. You can see that he's seen what it's like to have a family with the Tuskens, and yet again, because of gang conflict, his Tusken family has been killed, and you can see he's just got to the point where he's like, nope, I want to be powerful. I want to get to a point where I can protect people and actually be at the top of the pile instead of being one of the people that just kind of gets killed on the crossfire, which is a really, I know some people were like, why isn't he just a bounty hunter and stuff like that? But I think that's why the Tusken story and then the flashbacks of him being a child and things like that all really tie together. And his conversations with Fennec really hit home to what's going on in his mind, why he wants to be a crime lord, not a bounty hunter anymore. So then we get to the point where Fennec's like, okay, I'll come along and I'll help. And then my debt to you is repaid, as in, you saved my life. Because obviously there's a concept within the Star Wars universe that you sort of owe people if they sort of save your life and stuff like that.
There is that, but also he handed over a chunk of cash for the actual hardware.
Yeah. There was a cost involved with saving her life. So we see them sort of sneaking up to what is now Bib Fortuna's palace, formerly Jabba's palace, and they can sort of, they know where his starship is. She's got a tiny little spy droid ball from the sort of the end of her rifle.
Swiss Army knife.
Yeah. We've seen her pull a little throwing knife out at the end. This time it's a little sort of spy ball. It looks quite cute. Yeah. I'm sure somebody will 3D print a little prop because it's small, sort of handheld, and it goes flying off into the palace and kind of
maps the interior.
Yeah. So with little red dots, so you can see like all the guards, so they can sort of plot their route in and how many people they might have to fight along the way. At this point, sort of Boba Fett's all in. He lets his bantha go. He refers to her to go find other banthas and make baby banthas, which I think is really cute. And he sort of throws food off in the direction to sort of get it to try and sort of walk away. But I think it's cute. It sort of ties into the fact that, yeah, Tuskens and banthas probably do have a relationship, but he knows that he's about to get his ship back. He can't fit a bantha on his starship. Certainly not going to be traveling around the galaxy with a bantha in his cargo hold. So I think that that's nice. It didn't come to an unfortunate end and it's just off. I think that was cute. And so they count the guards inside and then we see nighttime. They're sneaking up to what is like a drain, sort of a grate, sort of sewerish, and they Fennec cuts the pipes and they sneak in and they sort of emerge.
Using tools from a bag of tricks,
yeah.
which comes up later.
Well, like, she's a master assassin, and for as far as we know, prior to her revival, she was just human. She's not like a different sort of species. We know certain species within the Star Wars universe are imbued with either long life or health or strength or sort of reflexes, like the pod racers and stuff like that. But we assume that she's just a human. So she's going to have a lot of bag of tricks, same as Boba Fett, you know, when he's got his armor and all the sort of rockets and little you know, we've got the whistling birds that the Mando uses. They've all got their bits and pieces. So I think it's fun sort of showing like how they really go about it. She's a master assassin, not just an assassin. She's a master assassin. So she's going to have a pretty big bag of tricks. I like that they come up in the kitchen through the grate and the floor and we get two really cool droids, or three droids in this scene.
So EV-99 shows up again, which I love because it's a cool Return of the Jedi character, but also a cool vintage action figure, which is probably what makes the character even more memorable for many of the older fans. Small note that EV-99 showed up a couple of times in The Mandalorian, and in both instances it was voiced as an uncredited role by Mark Hamill. I think we haven't had confirmation that this is the case this time around, but that's possible.
Yeah, it sounds very, very close to the original voices. It's quite authentic.
Quite heavily modulated.
And when it walks, it has the appearance that it's puppeted.
I think that's the case for
I think they, especially when it's either a character or something that they're bringing back from their original trilogy, they really try to sort of create it as it would have been in the original one, so that movement sort of matches.
That's very much the case for 88 as well.
That it looks puppeted. And one of the other droids in this kitchen is sort of like a chef droid that's got 6 arms, all sort of chopping up fruit and stuff like that.
This is an established droid type as well. We first saw in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. It's a COO cook droid that we saw on the passenger vehicle that Padme and Anakin travelled on.
Yeah, it sort of shoos R2 out of the line, because obviously R2 is going fetching food while Anakin and Padme are talking and stuff like that. So I appreciated the sort of the callback. We've got droids from the prequel era and droids from the original trilogy era.
And then the third droid to show up is from the animated era.
Yeah, it's a tiny sort of, it's a little squat little droid that's got sort of bunny ears, and it comes in with a net because the noise of Fennec and Boba climbing into the kitchen, the other 2 droids think maybe there's rats. So they're like, call the rat catcher droid. So this little droid comes in with his little net to go catch what they think of rats. And we do see rats in here. As you may remember, we do actually see real live rats within the sort of dungeon levels of Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. So it's kind of fun because it's one of the few times we will see a real world animal within the Star Wars universe, and they just call them rats.
Well, that and the other instance is snakes on Dagobah and a lizard on Dagobah.
Yeah.
So that does have precedent in the original trilogy.
Yeah.
But just a side note, I think that bunny-eared droid, I think it's an SCP service droid, and Count Dooku actually had one that worked for him, that was a service droid for him, but there's been a couple of instances where they showed up in animated form. So cool to see it in a live-action form, and I think, again, that was clearly a physical animatronic prop.
Yeah. So in this scene, we see they kind of sneak up and dispatch the 2 main droids. Boba Fett eventually catches the rat catcher droid, and sort of like, I guess, cowardice, the rat catcher droid switches itself off. So not helpful, but at least they're not going to raise the alarm because it's switched off.
I'm not sure that there was a lot of deep story progression in that scene, but it was just fun to see that mix of robots in particular.
Yeah. And another location that we don't really see too much within the sort of classic Jabba's palace. I always like the way that they kind of explore and expand on some of the sort of locations and lore from previous films.
Yeah, it just lets us know what's actually happening, how these function. I mean, looking back at the original trilogy, Jabba's palace, you kind of wonder what's going on behind the scenes for them to be able to have these long parties where they all just crash afterwards and so forth. But clearly there's other things going on in this palace. It is quite a little community.
Yeah, and kitchens aren't often seen in Star Wars. We see cantinas and things like that, and of course we see Aunt Beru in her kitchen. But it's always just that kind of fun thing, because obviously having that many denizens, we know that Bib Fortuna has gained in size since we saw him in Return of the Jedi, so he's probably, putting on banquets and feasts and stuff like that for all sorts of denizens there. So yeah, a kitchen is going to be pretty big and well stocked. So,
he gets to the hangar, now they've dispatched the droids.
But they fight a few guards that are wandering around the hallway. We see Gamorreans, we see Niktos.
Yeah. And specifically interesting that the Gamorrean guards are wearing apparel, armour that's actually closer to the original trilogy, closer to their appearance in Return of the Jedi than what we are seeing with the Gamorrean guards that are working with Boba at this point in time. So that little distinction, that change over time, I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The guards that are under Bib Fortuna's part of his entourage are different from when they appear later down the line.
Yeah. So, lots of fighting here. We see Boba Fett kind of goes off to one side because he wants to sneak into his ship and sort of turn it on, which he does, while Fennec, using her sort of sharpshooter skills, are taking out a lot of the guards that come running from the alarm. We see her cause the ultimate demise of a gonk droid. She shoots it and basically uses it as a bomb to sort of blow up and take out a few of the guards. She runs up onto the ramp of the ship because Boba Fett's now got it flying, and it's kind of hovering through the hangar, trying to get to the door. The door's down, and because of the sort of close quarters, he can't rotate the ship's sort of cannons to try and sort of fire at the door or anything like that. So it's up to Fennec. She spots the counterweight at the side that would obviously open the door. She's fighting off Gamorreans and things like that. On the ramp, we see some really cool moves, and she takes the shot, blows the counterweight, the door opens, and finally they sail off with, Slave One back in his full control, which is a really fun moment. It's an iconic ship. It's got such iconic noises and things like that, so it's really fun. I like to think that they've built a fair amount of the set, because the way that they move, it looks like they are climbing up into that sort of lying on their back position.
Definitely a really interesting interior that may well actually be rotatable if they didn't make two versions. If they didn't make a horizontal and vertical version, then whatever they did make may actually be able to.
It probably wouldn't be too hard to put it on one of those sort of hydraulic rigs to move it around, because so the first thing he's got on his mind after getting his ship is getting revenge for the Tuskens. So we see the next shot we see is the Nikto swoop gang sort of speedering across the Tatooine deserts.
We saw this in the trailer.
Yeah.
And we knew that it hadn't shown up quite yet, but when we saw it in the trailer, we only saw the swoop bikes. This time around, we get a slightly wider frame or a slightly prolonged cut of the clip to, you're about to say it.
We see the Slave One coming up on the rear, just kind of
subtle in the first instance,
just in the background, and then we sort of see that sort of resolute expression on Boba Fett's face as he uses the sort of front blaster cannons to just annihilate this whole swoop gang, and saves one of those sort of seeker missiles that we saw him use against Obi-Wan in Episode 2. Django used in Episode 2, to sort of take out the leader of the gang, just absolutely overkill him. So we see, boom, there's no one left, if all the speeders are gone and stuff like that. So
that's the first loose end completely tied up. The second loose end is he wants his armor back.
Yeah. Just before that, I forgot. Boba asks Fennec, I've got my ship back. You're free and clear. Where shall I drop you off? And she's like, I'll come for the ride. So at least for the now, she's decided that, I'll come along with Boba Fett. Maybe she's becoming intrigued. Maybe her sort of decision is changing about whether she wants to go off on her own or maybe hang around. So at this point, she's coming with him for the ride, because after annihilating the Swoop Gang, the next stop is his armor. You can see he's got a plan. He's got these steps, he got his revenge, got his ship back. Armor's the next thing, because we noticed earlier on in the episode, he talked about, why don't you just go ask Bib Fortuna for your ship back? And he's like, well, I'm less intimidating without my armor. He's just a guy with a pointy stick and a rifle. He really wants his, and because we know from The Mandalorian, the armor means a lot to him, when he's talking to the Mandalorian about getting his armor that belonged to his father back. It's got, sort of coded with their ancestry. It means a lot to him. So of course, the last thing he remembers is climbing out of the Sarlacc pit. But obviously at this point, he was quite ill.
When he awoke, he was only in his flight suit.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have an immediate recollection of the details between getting out of the Sarlacc and awakening.
So he thinks that maybe it sort of slid back in. Maybe the Tuskens took it off him and sort of left it near the Sarlacc pit or whatever, but he's going to go get it back. Yeah. So we see them sort of using the Slave One to great effect, sort of rotating it so that the cockpit is pointing down into the mouth of the Sarlacc. And at this point, we don't know if the Sarlacc is sort of awake, dead, whatever. And they're sort of all the way into the mouth of it, and then we see from the very, very depths the beak come up and sort of attack the cockpit. So we know the Sarlacc is still alive. It was kind of just lying in wait, and it grabs hold of the ship.
Two tentacles lock it in place. They anchor it in place. So the only way you can sort of use the cannons, fire spray the Slave One has multiple front-facing cannons. Two of them aren't maneuverable, so they'll just fire straight into the sand. But the ones that are maneuverable, he's sort of chopping through the sand to try and get to it, but with limited success.
Yeah, we know that the Sarlacc's pretty deep in that pit. So we see Fennec sort of undo her seatbelt from her seat, which is another reason why I think this was a practical set. She kind of falls against the...
gravity's in a specific direction.
So she falls against sort of the windscreen and climbs up and presses sort of a flashing button. And as we see, it releases a seismic charge. And it was kind of fun because my brain was like, why isn't it like floating away? And I'm like, of course, this is an atmosphere. It's not going to float away in space. We see it fall down the side of the ship and, of course, tumble into the Sarlacc pit where the beak of the Sarlacc grabs it. And then we get that so satisfying seismic charge that goes poof through the sand and sort of obviously would sort of chop through the Sarlacc in sort of the underground level.
Well, it disturbs the sand, underneath the surface for quite a distance because it causes the wreckage of the katana of Jabba's sail barge to shift and subside, to sink a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's disturbed things under the surface and as well as sort of bisecting, in fact, the Sarlacc into pretty clean components, I would think.
Yeah, we see the ship rise up and sort of the severed tentacles kind of dropping off the side of the ship. So we're like, okay, yep, it's not held anymore. Sarlacc's dead. And then we see the next bit is Boba Fett sort of using a rope to climb back out of the pit. He looks like he's covered in goo. Fennec's basically telling him off because it's, it's toxic down there. Yeah, it looks like it's maybe singed his skin. It's certainly discolored his robes, like bleachwood or something like that. And he's like, nah, it's not down there. So I guess at this point, he's not really sure what the next step is. We know eventually he gets it back because in the sort of the present day timeline, he clearly has his armor. We saw him get it back in The Mandalorian. So I'm wondering whether there's going to be more scenes.
The only missing piece is how he tracks it down. We see how he gets it back. We just don't know how he tracks it down to.
We know that when he was in town, he asked the Jawas where the Pike Syndicate headquarters were. So it's possible that, he would go find Jawas, ask around, maybe somebody, and then somebody might go, oh yeah, that guy over in that town was wearing Mandalorian armor. Maybe he had it and track it down.
I don't think it needs
it
to
would be
complex.
kind of fun if we saw it. It would be kind of fun if they brought Cobb Vanth and he was like, oh yeah, Din Djarin took it, and then off they go there. Because obviously at some point he has to track down the Mandalorian on Tython of all places, and then obviously we know how he gets it back there. But there's just a tiny little part. But I think they're trying not to overlap it. But then again, we might get quite a lot of overlap with the Mandalorian if that teaser at the end is anything to go by. But yeah, we get an interesting sort of dialogue between Fennec and Boba talking about the differences between bounty hunting and being a crime lord. that he's sick of bounty hunters dying because of the idiocy of others. He talks about our kind, and obviously they've both experienced that, and that he needs brains and muscle to fulfill his plan, and she has both. And she kind of has yeah, I know kind of look on her face, but she values freedom. She doesn't like being tied down. And he says, well, he can offer her something that nobody else can, which is loyalty, and says that, I'll pledge my life to protect you. And she's kind of, you can see she's thinking about that. Nobody's really sort of cared about her life. They pay her, and whether she does the job or not, they'll just pay the next person. If she dies, nobody really cares in the underworld. But this is kind of like, you can see it's intriguing to her. And she says, oh, maybe your time with the Tuscans has made you soft, because he's saying, oh, I'll protect you. And he says, no, what they taught me was that you need a tribe.
You can only get so far without a tribe, he specifically says, yeah.
Yeah. And certainly from the harsh conditions of Tatooine, that is going to be a lesson that all the Tuscans will instill on everyone within their clans and things like that. So we're really getting a sense that, yes, this is where he's going to start to build people around him, but in a more collaborative effort than perhaps previous crime lords, where they really didn't care about the people they hired.
So that was all flashback mode, and that was the bulk. That was the bulk of the episode in many ways. There were two main remaining scenes, one featuring Chrysanthemum and one featuring the other crime lords, all back in the present timeline.
Yeah.
So the first one, back once he's come out of the back to tank, which we actually see when his flashback is completed, he comes out of the Bacta.
Yeah. This is the moment where he gets out of the Bacta tank, ending the flashback scene, and the droid tells him he's fully healed. Well, one of the last scenes when he was in the Bacta tank was him killing Bib Fortuna and kind of taking the throne, which is where we kind of start the series with that scene at the end of the second season of The Mandalorian. So it might imply that we're not getting any more flashbacks. He doesn't need to go in the Bacta tank unless he gets seriously wounded in an upcoming episode.
And there's a time jump in his flashback sequence.
Yes.
They haven't jumped around. All the flashback sequences have been in chronological order.
Yeah. And I think it was a really interesting way to do it. You could sort of tell that this, obviously it's Boba Fett in his Tusken robes versus Boba Fett in his new armor. And you didn't, but you could easily tell what was flashback and what wasn't. But I thought it was an interesting storytelling device, that he was sort of thinking about these things, because he's got a big plan, and all of these events in his recent life have really led him to what he's doing now, these big decisions, this shift from being a bounty hunter all his life to what he's doing now. And so
one of his plans is to talk to Chrysanthemum at this point, and he goes to the sanctuary to look for him.
Well, Fennec says something about that there's no sign of the mayor, and she doesn't know that it's safe for him to have a presence in town. And he says power hates a vacuum, that he feels like if he doesn't have a presence in town, then people will start to think he's hiding or cowardice or whatever, that they will make the step. So he's kind of just going into town to kind of be a presence, I feel. And obviously at the sanctuary, he comes across a really interesting scene.
Yeah, so, Chrysanthemum's obviously there. He's a volatile character with tendencies towards violence and aggression. He sees the Chrysanthemum, we focus on him, and from his point of view in many ways, see him looking at a small crowd of Trandoshans. We know that there's friction between Trandoshans and Wookiees as a species. We see the Trandoshans just basically living it up, enjoying themselves, not a care in the world, making money, just
gambling.
The sanctuary is a place for
pleasures, games, and entertainment. Without sort of care. Yeah, it's where wealthy people to go to sort of relax and.
So this doesn't sit well. This doesn't sit well with Chrysanthemum, and he basically just straight up attacks them.
We see him sort of gritting his knuckles. We see the electro effect of his knuckle dusters sort of turning on. He's obviously been drinking. We see him drinking a mug of what I assume is some sort of Star Wars alcoholic beverage, and that kind of riles him up, and he decides he's gonna let loose, maybe get some sort of nerves out or whatever, and just tackles them. Two of the
Trandoshans get thrown across the room, around the room, over the tables and so forth, and he's got the third one in a chokehold with his feet off the ground, and Garsa Flip obviously doesn't want too much trouble. It disturbs the vibe of the sanctuary completely. Tries to talk him out of it, and it looks like she's doing a really, really good job. She's a really charismatic character. She's got a lot of charm, and I think under many other circumstances with most other characters it would probably work.
I thought this was an interesting part because she conveys a bit of backstory, a little bit of character for Black Chrysanthemum. If you haven't read the comics, then you're just like, oh, he's just a big Wookiee. But she references his time as sort of a sort of a gladiator of sorts, a champion in sort of fighting pits, and that he was like, his name was legendary and he was like sort of feared and all this kind of stuff. So I thought that was kind of fun, giving a little bit more backstory to his character without it getting too woody. And at the same time, she's trying to puff up his ego, say, this is kind of beneath you, you're feared, you don't need to brawl to kind of prove how much you're respected and feared. And she offers
I
to kind of...
It was a really neat scene. I thought it actually said a lot about Gassafip as a character. I think it really conveyed the power that she generally has within her domain, within her space.
He doesn't try to attack her. He looks like he's listening to her. He doesn't just kind of dismiss her.
The way she did it kind of implied that when she normally does it carries weight and is effective. Yeah.
She offers to sort of wipe his bar tab if he just sort of lets the issue go and leaves. He seems to consider this for a moment, then decides, nah, I'm going to have some fun. And then we see the sort of classic A New Hope Cantina scene where he rips the arm off the Trandoshan that he had in his grip. And we see the Trandoshan fall to the floor, and then sort of the arm. It was done well, so it's not gory. We don't see like big pools of blood or anything like that. The severed end of the arm is off camera, so it's not going to be too frightening for kids. But you clearly understand what's going on.
It was almost like, because he paid her afterwards, he basically paid up his tab. So it was almost like, he's had enough of Trandoshan, so he's going to do this, but he respects her enough to not make a complete mess.
Yeah, that he still pays his reference and things like that. And at the end, because obviously everyone stopped to watch the commotion going on, at the end of it, she says, "Hit it, Max," referring to the Ortolan in the corner. So I think that's pretty much, they know that they can't call him Max, and everyone's like, oh, it would be Max Rebo. So I think that confirms that, yes, somehow Max Rebo was on like a coffee break or something, or they've kind of just worked it out that he wasn't really on Jabba's sail barge at the time of the explosion.
There were a few characters that managed to escape the sail barge. There was a little bit of time between the start of the kerfuffle and the main cannons being fired into the deck. So there was time and opportunity for a few to escape.
We see characters kind of running around flailing as the guards are all jumping into action, but we're not going to see Max Rebo jumping into action. He's going to be scurrying out the back door along with the other musicians and any kind of entertainment. Any slaves that don't really want to be there are just going to hightail it as soon as Leia starts to choke Jabba with his chain. So I thought that was fun. Jumping back to the sanctuary, obviously Chrysanthemum walks out the door. Boba Fett follows him because he's got something to ask him. And he said, "Looks like you could use a job." And then in the next scene, where we have the banquet of all the crime lords in Boba's palace, Chrysanthemum is there kind of in the background being a bit of a guard, a bit of a backup. So we see that, yes, the Wookiee might be a little bit suspicious, maybe a little bit burned by being captured previously, but he wants something to do. And if you're sort of an enforcer for a crime lord, you're going to see a bit more legit action. You're going to have enemies to go up against and sort of get his aggression out.
Yeah, so it's mildly interesting because the banquet has Trandoshans there as well, but the crime lords that we've encountered before has Trandoshans are at the table, Aquilish are at the table, and Klatooinians are at the table.
Just a side note, I'm really, really hoping we get lots more of Black Chrysanthemum. I think it's really, really fun. Obviously, there's like Wookiees like all throughout Star Wars. So I think this is like a fun way because it was one of those classic species we don't really see in The Mandalorian much. We have a lot of Wookiees in episode 3. We have Chewbacca, obviously. We have Wookiees in the holiday special. And then, of course, we have Chewbacca again in the sequel trilogy. So it's kind of fun to see yet another character, a bit of a spin. So it sort of feels familiar, but not just, oh, it looks like Chewbacca, but it's got a different name and stuff like that. I think it's fun because the way that he wears armor and sort of straps across is very reminiscent of the Kashyyyk Kashyyyk Wookiees we see fighting on their home planet in episode 3. So I like that vibe. But he's got such a distinct personality right off the bat. You don't really need to know much about him to kind of get his character and his vibe. And super fun for comic fans to see another character sort of jumping off the pages and being added to live action. So that's really fun.
So the essence of the banquet is that Boba Fett's trying to convince these other crime lords that own different parts, their territories in different parts of Mos Espa, to work with them against the Pikes, because if the Pikes take over, at this point in time they're mainly threatening Boba Fett's territory, but Boba Fett, and presumably I think at one point he says they're not dumb enough to think that if the Pikes take over one territory, they won't just continue to expand and ultimately take over everyone's territory. So Boba Fett's trying to talk these groups into working together. But selfishly, they see that they're not immediately threatened, maybe down the line, but at this point they're not immediately threatened, so they politely decline. And he says, well, at least if that's the way you're going to play it, at least don't get in my way, don't backstab me, when the Pikes ultimately come to each of them and ask them to work, to partner up against Boba Fett.
Yeah, basically ask them to just stay by the sidelines. I'm going to do this myself, because if you're not going to do it, I will.
So during that phase of events, we see the Rancor again, which is cool, or at least reference to the Rancor.
Yeah, because one of them says something like, why should we, risk ourselves for you? And then boom, we get this big Rancor claw grabbing at the grate, which we now know that the banquet table is seated on that sort of classic Rancor grate that sits in front of the throne in Jabba's palace. It wasn't immediately clear when they were setting up that scene. They kind of hid the fact that was directly on the grate. So that was fun. So while we didn't get a lot of the Rancor, I'm still really hoping for a bit more in the next episode, because, we've got to see Boba Fett riding this Rancor. It still just sort of gave the nod, and he's let everyone know that, yes, that Rancor pit isn't empty. He has a Rancor, because not everyone would know. It was kind of a small contingent that saw the Hutt twins delivering the Rancor.
Oh, yeah,
so everyone else in Mos Espa probably doesn't know that he's got a new one. So that kind of, we can only imagine what it would look like if a Rancor was running havoc down the streets of Mos Espa. That would be quite a sight. So they know that he's got this muscle behind him, as well as, Black Chrysanthemum, the Mod gang.
So we've established at this point that Boba Fett's on his own. He's not going to get help from either of those three contingents, which is kind of interesting, because we're setting things up for a war, for a head-to-head war, but it's not clear who's going to be supporting who's going to be on whose side. It may be yet that some of those three groups, anyone or more than one of those three groups, does actually side with the Pikes. It could get really quite complicated in terms of who's allied with whom. I
think it's quite a point, because these three groups are obviously the sort of the leaders of these sort of crime factions within Mos Espa, but they're all dressed very much like they enjoy wealth, that they enjoy not having to pick up and fight themselves, that they have underlings to do it.
Crime bosses who don't do the dirty work, they have enforcers.
Yeah. So it's not at all surprising that they don't want to get drawn into this, lest they, have to actually do something or risk themselves in it. So it's not entirely surprising. Probably works out well, because he's got a Wookiee on his team, and teaming up with the Trandoshans probably wouldn't go down so well. But yeah, it does obviously leave the question open. Okay, he can't just take on the entire Pike syndicate with just him and Fennec and Black Chrysanthemum. They're going to need a bit more. So we get the scene where they're kind of on the balcony looking at the crime lords walking off, sort of getting on their speeders and going back to Mos Espa, and they're like, we're going to need some muscle. That they've got a lot of cash, and cash can buy muscle. And then as they're kind of looking out, sort of pondering this, we hear the classic, instantly recognizable Mandalorian music, and that's no coincidence. I mean, we've yet to see the next episode, but they have to cross paths with the Mandalorian. Whether Din Djarin himself comes to help Boba Fett, we see that they have certainly aided each other to, the latter half of the second season of The Mandalorian. He helps Mando. He pledges to basically, save Grogu because of the sort of exchange.
He helps him on Morak, the Imperial refinery planet, and he helps him with the encounter with Moff Gideon's cruiser. Like the setup chasing the shuttle.
He took enemy fire, sort of, pretending to be the aggressor while they're trying to sneak on in a stolen shuttle and stuff like that. So he sort of put himself out there to help Din Djarin. So I wouldn't be surprised if Din Djarin is like, okay, we assume that because he's got his armor painted, he's back on Tatooine, that this is after the events of season 2, where Grogu has returned with the Jedi. Yeah. So he is unencumbered by having to sort of guard him or not get him into, dangerous situations. So who knows? Maybe he'll be like, yeah, let's come and team up. I mean, I think fans would absolutely love that. The Mandalorian has become a beloved character very, very quickly. So I think that would be really fun. He might just point him in the direction of people to team up with. He's like, oh yeah, there's Koska Reeves and Bo-Katan, maybe he points them in the direction of other Mandalorians or some other sort of faction. Yeah, but even just the appearance will be really, really cool, seeing those two together. But I have to say, I kind of want to see them team up. Certainly with that music, it would be kind of cruel, because we kind of got that a little bit with Ahsoka. He's like, we came across Ahsoka, and he's like, and she's like, oh no, you just go here. She sent him on another quest. They didn't team up specifically in that episode. So I'm kind of hoping that this time it will be a true team up, rather than Din Djarin's just going to meet him in a cantina somewhere and go, oh yeah, go meet up with Grief Karga, and he'll get you in touch with some bounty hunters or something.
Yeah, so we're not far off the next episode. It's going to be really interesting to see. It was quite an open-ended, even though that was a central episode that tied a lot of loose ends together, it left everything moving forward quite open-ended. There's lots of different permutations and combinations as to how things can move forward from this point.
I thought the title was really good, The Gathering Storm, because he's sort of really gathering bits and pieces together here. He's finally got Fennec at his side. He's got his Rancor. He's got Cash. He's got a ship back. It's really interesting. And, The Gathering Storm kind of is like the approaching storm. We know that there's going to be a big conflict, a big sort of thing coming up on the horizon. So it was really
3 episodes left. The interesting thing is going to be how they spread it out and how they're going to pace that spreading out.
Yeah,
we're not going to get into this head-to-head conflict straight away, or they were going to get a little bit more assemblage.
Build up
of the teams, of the respective teams, because we've still got to see something along the lines of Rancor training. I think that's some level of explanation related to that.
Yeah, they can't just bust out with him training, considering that they've shown us all of this backstory, sort of building character with the Tuskens. It would be weird to just skip over a sort of a montage. We got a prolonged shot of Fennec getting her insides fixed. I don't think they're just going to skip over Rancor training, especially because they know how cool that's going to be on screen.
So yeah, really, really good sort of central episode. As I say, leaving the door quite wide open for quite interesting opportunities and speculation at this point, and I'm really excited to see where it's going to go. But for now, that's about it for this installment. I guess we're done doing talking. If you've got any thoughts on topics we discussed today, we're definitely keen to hear them. Leave a comment on the YouTube page or our website page for this podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us share our passion for Star Wars. Stay tuned to our website, SWNZ.co.nz, for Star Wars news for New Zealanders and another podcast episode next week. Don't forget, you can jump on over to either our Facebook group or the SWNZ message boards to discuss all the latest Star Wars news with other Kiwi fans. Kia ora, kia noho haumaru. Thank you for listening and stay safe.
Turou Hawaiki. May the Force be with you. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a like, check out our other videos, and subscribe for alerts about new uploads. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.